Genesis 35. Jacob goes back to Bethel. After these things had happened, God said to Jacob, "Go to Bethel and live there. Build an altar to worship me. I am the God who appeared to you when you were running away from Esau." So Jacob told the people in his house and everyone who was with him, "Throw out all the foreign idols that you have with you. Wash your body very well and put on clean clothes. Then we will go to Bethel. I will build an altar there to worship God. He is the one who answered me when I was in trouble. And he has been with me everywhere that I went." So the people gave to Jacob all their idols and the rings that were in their ears. Jacob buried these things under the oak tree near Shechem city. Then they began their journey. All the towns near there were afraid of God's power. So, no one attacked Jacob and his people. Jacob and everyone with him arrived at Luz, now called Bethel. That is in the land of Canaan. Jacob built an altar there. He called the place El Bethel, because that was where God appeared to him. God had appeared to him when he was running away from his brother Esau. El Bethel means God of Bethel. Rebekah's nurse, Deborah, died at that time. Jacob buried her under the oak tree near Bethel. That is why they call the place Allon Bachuth. Allon Bachuth means oak tree where people wept. After Jacob returned from Paddan Aram, God appeared to him again. God blessed Jacob. He said to Jacob, "Your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Instead, your name will be Israel." So God gave the name Israel to Jacob. See Genesis 32:28. Then God said to him, "I am Almighty God. Give birth to many children so that your descendants become very many. They will become many nations and some of them will be kings. I give to you the land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac. Yes, I will give this land to your descendants that come after you." God is telling Jacob the promise that he made to Abraham, Genesis 17:1-8, and to Isaac, Genesis 26:3. Then God went away from the place where he spoke to Jacob. Jacob set up a special stone on the ground. It showed the place where God had spoken to him. He poured a drink offering on the stone. He also poured olive oil on it. In that way, Jacob called the place where God spoke to him Bethel. Then they left Bethel and they continued to travel. When they were still a long way from Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth. She had a lot of pain. As she was having even more pain, the woman who was helping her said, "Do not be afraid. You have another son." But Rachel was dying. With her last breath, she gave to her son the name Ben-Oni. But Jacob, his father, called him Benjamin. Ephrath is now called Bethlehem. Ben-Oni means son of my pain. Benjamin means son of my right hand. After Rachel died, they buried near the road that goes to Ephrath. Jacob set up a special stone over the place where they buried Rachel. This stone still shows the place. Israel then traveled on again. He put up his tents beyond Migdal Eder. While Israel stayed there, his son Reuben had sex with Bilhah. She was Israel's slave wife, and Israel heard what had happened. Jacob is now called Israel, but the Bible uses both names. Jacob had 12 sons. The sons of Leah were Jacob's firstborn, Reuben, then Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Rachel's servant, Bilhah, were Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Leah's servant, Zilpah, were Gad and Asher. Those were Jacob's sons who were born to him in Paddan Aram. Jacob arrived back at his father Isaac's home. This is in Mamre, also called Kiriath Arba, or Hebron. This is the place where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. Isaac lived for 180 years. Then he died and he joined his ancestors. He was an old man who had lived a long life. His sons, Esau and Jacob, buried him. Jacob did not feel safe now near the town called Shechem. His sons, Simeon and Levi, had been angry, so they killed many men there. And Jacob was afraid that the relatives of those men might attack his family. God told Jacob to take his family to Bethel. It seems that Jacob was pleased to take his family to Bethel. God first spoke to Jacob at Bethel. Jacob could teach his family about God during the journey. He explained to them how he met the real God. He told them that they should not keep their idols images of false gods. And he told his family that they were going to a holy place. So, they had to prepare themselves. At Bethel, God repeated his promises to Jacob. And Jacob rebuilt the altar that he made there. Soon afterwards, Jacob's last son, called Benjamin, was born. But Benjamin's mother, Rachel, died at the birth. A terrible event happened afterwards. It was the custom in Canaan that the oldest son should have sex with his father's wives. Then, that son would become the leader of the family. See 2 Samuel 16, 21-22. Jacob knew that this action was very wicked. And he hoped that his own sons had learned about God. But Jacob could not control his sons. They were adults now. So, they were responsible for their own behavior. Reuben, who was Jacob's first son, had sex with Bilhah. Bilhah was Jacob's concubine. She had been Rachel's maid. Jacob heard about Reuben's behavior. So, Jacob decided that Reuben must not receive the birthright. And Reuben did not receive a blessing from Jacob. Genesis 49, 3-4. Simeon and Levi were the oldest sons after Reuben. But Jacob would not give them the birthright because of their cruelty. So instead, Jacob chose Joseph. Genesis 37:3, 1 Chronicles 5, 1-2. Notes on the verses. Verse 1, God was gently reminding Jacob that God had been faithful. He had taken care of Jacob. Now Jacob needed to worship God at Bethel. Jacob had promised to do that. Verses 2-4, people in Jacob's household still had idols. That seems strange. However, they threw the idols away when Jacob asked them to. They also threw away earrings. We think that the earrings had some connection with idols. So those that wore the earrings served the idols. The earrings were evidence of that. It is also strange that Jacob buried those things under a tree. He did not destroy them. Usually, before people worshipped God in a special way, they washed themselves. They put on clean clothes. They did those things to respect God. It made the people remember that God is perfect. So, they must prepare themselves to worship Him. Verse 5, Jacob's sons had done an evil thing to the men in Shechem. Chapter 34. So Jacob was afraid of the people that lived near. Verse 7, El Bethel means God of Bethel. That is, God who appeared at Bethel. Bethel means the house of God. Bethel was the place where Jacob decided to serve God. Genesis 28, 19-22. Verse 8, Deborah was very old. The writer speaks about her death. They buried her below Bethel. Some people think that it means near Bethel. Or perhaps they buried her at the actual spot where God first appeared to Jacob. Genesis 28, 11-19. The wives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all had maids, also called nurses. And all these maids became concubines, except for Deborah. Deborah was a loyal servant. And it seems that the whole family loved her. Verse 9, perhaps the writer was saying again what had happened earlier. Look at verse 1. When something was repeated in the Bible, it was very important. Verses 10-13, God repeated His promises to Jacob. Jacob's descendants would become a great nation. And God would give to them the country called Canaan. Verses 14-15, this was the way that they worshipped God. It made the column special for them. This was the same place where God spoke to Jacob during a dream. See Genesis 28, 10-22. At that time, Jacob put up a stone column. But it was now 20 years later. At last, Jacob was able to return to that place. Perhaps his column had fallen down and Jacob rebuilt it? Verses 16-18, Rachel had the second son that she wanted. Genesis 30, 24. But she did not stay alive after the birth. Benoni means son of my sorrow. That means the son that I got when I was sad. Sorrow means sad feelings. Benjamin means son of my right hand. A man would place his right hand on his oldest son when he blessed that son. See Genesis 48, 13-19. So, people associated the right hand with the blessing. So, the name Benjamin meant that God would bless him. Verses 19-20. Bethlehem became a very important town. King David came from Bethlehem, so Bethlehem became a royal town. And Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Verse 22. What Reuben did was very serious. Such actions in a family were very bad. Reuben was probably trying to become the head of the family instead of Jacob. Reuben wanted to show his authority. Jacob heard. And he decided that Joseph would receive the birthright instead of Reuben. Verses 23-26. Nearly all Jacob's sons were born in Paddan Aram. Benjamin was not born there. But the writer added Benjamin's name in verse 24 so that this list of Jacob's sons was complete. Verses 27-29. Jacob and Esau met together again. They buried their father Isaac together. Isaac lived much longer than anyone had expected. Isaac was a man with a calm attitude. He did not like arguments. He would have been pleased that Jacob and Esau met together for his funeral. Their arguments had ended. And they were friendly again. Genesis 36. Esau's family. This is the report about Esau and his family. Esau is also called Edom. Esau took women from Canaan to be his wives. They were, Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. Oholibamah, the daughter of Anna and granddaughter of Zibeon the Hivite. Basemath, the daughter of Ishmael and sister of Nebaioth. Esau's wife Adah gave birth to a son called Eliphaz. Basemath gave birth to a son called Reuel. Oholibamah gave birth to 3 sons, Jush, Jalem and Korah. Those were Esau's sons that were born in the land of Canaan. Esau went to a land that was a long way from his brother Jacob. When Esau went, he took with him his wives, his sons and daughters and everyone in his house. He took his animals and all the things that he had got while he lived in Canaan. Esau and Jacob both had too many animals to live together in the same place. There was not enough land to give food for all their animals. So Esau went to live in the hills of Seir. He was also called Edom. This is a list of Esau's descendants, the Edomites. They lived in the hill country of Seir. These are the names of Esau's sons: Eliphaz, the son of Esau's wife, Adah. Reuel, the son of Esau's wife, Basemath. The sons of Eliphaz were Taman, Omar, Zepho, Gatam, and Kenaz. Esau's son Eliphaz also had a slave wife. Her name was Timnah. She gave birth to a son called Amalek. Those were the grandsons of Esau's wife, Adah. The sons of Reuel were Nahat, Zerah, Shammah and Mizah. Those were grandsons of Esau's wife, Basemath. Esau's wife Oholibamah was the daughter of Anna and the granddaughter of Zibeon. Her sons were Jush, Jalem and Korah. These were Esau's descendants who became leaders of their clans. The sons of Esau's firstborn son, Eliphaz, were Taman, Omar, Zepho, Kenaz, Korah, Gatam, and Amalek. These were the clan leaders who were descendants of Eliphaz in Edom. They were grandsons of Adah. The sons of Esau's son, Reuel, who became clan leaders in Edom, were Nahat, Zerah, Shammah and Mizah. They were grandsons of Esau's wife Basemath. The sons of Esau's wife, Oholibamah, who became clan leaders, were Jush, Jalem and Korah. Oholibamah was the daughter of Anna. All those were the sons of Esau, and they became the leaders of their clans. These were the descendants of Seir the Horite. They lived in that land before Esau arrived there. They were Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anna, Dishon, Ezer and Dishan. These descendants of Seir were leaders of the Horite clans in Edom. Lotan's sons were Hori and Homam. Lotan had a sister called Timnah. Shobal's sons were Alvan, Manahath, Ebal, Shepho, and Onam. Zibeon's sons were Ea and Anna. This was the same Anna who found a place with hot water in the wilderness when he was taking care of his father Zibeon's donkeys. Anna's children were Dishon and Oholibamah, his daughter. Dishon's sons were Hemdan, Eshban, Ithran and Karen. Ezer's sons were Bilhan, Zavan and Achan. Dishon's sons were Uz and Aaron. These were the leaders of the Horite clans in the land of Seir: Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anna, Dishon, Ezer and Dishon. Before a king ruled over the Israelites, these kings ruled in the land of Edom. Beer's son Bela became king of Edom. His city was called Dinhabah. When Bela died, Zerah's son Jobab became the next king. When Jobab died, Husham from the land of the Temanites became the next king. When Husham died, Bedad's son Hadad became the next king. Bedad had fought the Midianites in the country of Moab and he had won against them. Hadad's city was called Avith. When Hadad died, Samlah from Masrekah became the next king. When Samlah died, Shaul from Rehoboth on the river became the next king. When Shaul died, Akbar's son Baal-Hanan became the next king. When Baal-Hanan died, Hadad became the next king. His city was called Pel. His wife's name was Mehetabel. She was the daughter of Matred, and the granddaughter of Mezahab. These descendants of Esau were the leaders of their clans: Timnah, Alva, Jetheth, Oholibamah, Ilah, Pinion, Kenaz, Taman, Mibzar, Magdiel, and Iram. These were the leaders who lived with their families in different places in the land. Each place was called the same name as the clan leader who lived there. All those people are the descendants of Esau, the ancestor of the Edomites. People try to discover what the names of Esau's descendants meant. People try to link the names with nations that people knew in that area later. But that is not very helpful. God always does the things that he promises to do. In this chapter, the writer reminds us about this principle. Esau was not the son that God had chosen. But God had made a promise about Esau, Genesis 25:23. So, God gave many descendants to Esau. Later, King David defeated the Edomites and he ruled over them. So they did serve Jacob's descendants. Notes on the verses. Verses 2-8: Esau's first two wives did not come from Abraham's family. The writer reminds us about that. God had especially chosen Abraham's family. So God did not want them to marry Canaanite wives. But Esau did not care about that. It is very difficult to compare the lists that contain Esau's wives. From chapters 26 and 28, we can make one list of Esau's wives. There is Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite. There is Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And there is Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael. Then here in verses 2 and 3, we have another list of Esau's wives. Both lists have the name Basemath, but in each list she has a different father. And there are two fathers that have a different daughter in each list. Maybe the wives had more than one name. Maybe Esau had more than 3 wives. We do not know. Verse 7: God led Esau away from Jacob's family. He did not want Esau and Jacob to marry members of each other's family. We do not know when Esau went to live in Seir. In Genesis 32:3, we see that Esau was already living in Seir then. God was blessing both brothers with large flocks. He had promised to do that. Verses 9-40: the list of Esau's descendants continues. Their nation became large and successful. They appointed kings before Jacob's descendants did. Verse 31. But God's ideas about success are different from people's ideas. In God's opinion, a nation is not really successful just because it becomes large and powerful. And a nation does not become really successful just because it appoints important kings. The only really successful nations are those whose rulers and people serve God. Genesis 37. Joseph and his brothers. Jacob lived in Canaan, the land where his father had lived. God gave Jacob the new name Israel. See Genesis 32:28, 35, 10. The Bible uses both names for the same person, but here we have used Jacob. This is the report about Jacob and his family. Joseph was Jacob's son. When he was 17 years old, he took care of his father's sheep and goats. He did this together with his brothers. These were the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. Sometimes Joseph told his father bad things about his brothers. Jacob loved Joseph more than he loved any of his other sons. This was because Joseph was born when Jacob was old. So Jacob made a special coat for Joseph. Joseph's brothers knew that Jacob loved him more than he loved them. So they hated Joseph. They could not say anything nice to him. One night, Joseph had a dream and he told his brothers about it. When they heard about the dream, Joseph's brothers hated him even more than they did before. Joseph said to his brothers, "Listen to what happened in my dream. We were out in the field tying the crops together into bundles. Then my bundle stood up. Your bundle stood in a circle round my bundle. And all your bundles bent down to respect my bundle." Joseph's brothers said to him, "Do you really think that you will be like a king and rule over us like that?" They hated Joseph even more because of what he told them about his dream. Then Joseph had another dream and he told his brothers about it. He said, "Listen to me. I have had another dream. This is what happened. The sun, the moon, and stars bent down in front of me." Joseph told his father and his brothers about the dream. Jacob, his father, was angry with him. He said to Joseph, "You should not tell us about a dream like that. Do you really think that I, your mother and your brothers will come and bend down in front of you?" Joseph's brothers were very jealous of him. But Jacob thought carefully about what Joseph had said. One day, Joseph's brothers had taken their father's sheep to eat grass in the fields. This was near Shechem city. Jacob said to Joseph, "You know that your brothers have taken my sheep to eat grass near Shechem. I want you to go to them." Joseph replied, "I am ready to go." So Jacob said to Joseph, "Go and see if your brothers are well. See if the sheep have enough grass to eat. Then come back and tell me news about them." Then Jacob sent Joseph from the valley of Hebron to go to them. When Joseph arrived near Shechem and he was walking in the fields there, a man met him. He asked Joseph, "What are you looking for?" Joseph replied, "I am looking for my brothers. They have taken the sheep to eat grass. Please tell me where they are." The man said, "They have moved away from here. I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went to look for his brothers. He found them at Dothan. But his brothers recognized Joseph, while he was still far away. Before he had arrived where they were, they decided on a way to kill him. They said to each other, "Here comes the man who likes to dream. We will kill him. We can throw him into one of the dry wells. We can tell people that a wild animal ate him. Then his dreams will never become true." When Reuben heard this, he tried to save Joseph from the other brothers. He said, "We should not kill him. Do not even get his blood on your hands. Just throw him into this dry well here in the wilderness. But do not attack him." Reuben said this to save Joseph, so that his brothers would not kill him. Then later, Reuben could take Joseph back to his father. So Joseph arrived at where his brothers were. He was wearing his special coat, but they took it off him. Then they took hold of Joseph and they threw him into the empty well. It had no water in it. Then the brothers sat down to eat their meal. They looked up and they saw a group of Ishmaelites coming towards them. They were coming from the region that is called Gilead. They were riding on camels that carried spices, and different kinds of oils for medicine. They were taking them to sell in Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "We could kill our brother and then hide his body. But then we will not get anything for ourselves. So, let us sell him to these Ishmaelites. We do not need to hurt him. Then we will not have to kill him. We should remember that he is our brother. He is our own relative." Judah's brothers agreed with what he said. When the Midianite traders came near to Joseph's brothers, they pulled him out of the dry well. They sold him to the Ishmaelites for silver coins. The Ishmaelites took Joseph with them to Egypt. Later, Reuben returned to the dry well. He saw that Joseph was not there. He tore his clothes because he was very upset. Reuben went back to his brothers. He said to them, "The boy is not in the well. What can I do now?" Reuben was upset because he had tried to save Joseph. He was the oldest of all the brothers. Now he will have to tell his father that Joseph has gone. Then the brothers killed a goat. They took its blood and they put the blood all over Joseph's special coat. They took the coat back to their father and they told him, "We found this coat. Look at it. Tell us if it is your son's coat." Jacob saw that it was Joseph's coat. He said, "It is my son's coat. A wild animal must have eaten him. The animal has torn Joseph's body into pieces." Jacob was so upset that he tore his own clothes. He put on clothes made from sackcloth to show how sad he was. He wept for many days because his son had died. All Jacob's sons and daughters came to comfort him. But Jacob was very sad, so they could not make him happy. Jacob said, "I will be sad until the day that I die, because my son is dead." Jacob wept because Joseph was dead. While this was happening, the Midianites took Joseph into Egypt. They sold him to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officers. Potiphar had authority over all of Pharaoh's guards. The account of Joseph's life begins in this chapter. Reuben was Jacob's oldest son. So, Reuben had the birthright. But Reuben had carried out a wicked deed against Jacob. Genesis 35:22. So, Jacob decided that Reuben should not receive the birthright. Simeon and Levi were the oldest sons after Reuben. But they too had upset Jacob. Chapter 34. So, Jacob chose Joseph to receive the birthright. Jacob's other sons were angry. Except for Benjamin, who was still very young, they were all older than Joseph. Jacob made a special coat for Joseph. This probably showed that Joseph had the birthright. And Joseph had special dreams. These dreams were prophecies. They showed that Joseph would become the leader of the family. But Joseph's brothers hated the dreams. In fact, they hated Joseph. Joseph's brothers were working away from home. They were looking after Jacob's animals. Jacob sent Joseph to them. Jacob wanted to know what was happening. This was an opportunity for the brothers to attack Joseph. Their first plan was to kill Joseph. But Reuben had a secret plan to save Joseph. Perhaps Reuben wanted to please Jacob. Then perhaps Jacob might change his mind about Reuben's birthright. But when Reuben was away, Judah made another plan. Judah and the other brothers sold Joseph as a slave. Then they pretended to Jacob that Joseph was dead. Jacob was very sad. Nobody could comfort him. He felt as if his only righteous son was dead. But Joseph was not dead. In fact, Joseph became a slave in Egypt. God allowed these things to happen because God had a plan to save the lives of many people. Genesis 45:5. Notes on the verses. Verse 1, Jacob made his home in the country where his father Isaac had wandered about. Verse 2, Joseph was a helper for his brothers. Actually, they had the same father, but they had different mothers. So they were only half-brothers. But Joseph was more important in the family than they were. Joseph was the first son of Jacob's favorite wife. But these brothers were just the sons of concubines. When Joseph returned to Jacob, Joseph told a bad report to his father. People usually think that the brothers were not looking after the animals well. But the Bible does not say what the bad report was about. Verses 3-4, Jacob upset his family. He gave more to Joseph than Israel gave to Joseph's brothers. The coat was very special. It was not a coat that Joseph would work in. It made his brothers angry just to see Joseph wear it. They had to work hard, while Joseph wore a special coat. And he did not seem to work like them. Joseph was special. He was Rachel's first son. And Rachel was the wife whom Jacob really loved. So, Joseph became Jacob's favorite son. Verses 5 to 8. Jacob had decided that the birthright belonged to Joseph. Joseph's first dream seemed to show that this decision was right. In the past, God had spoken to Jacob too by means of dreams. But Joseph's brothers were unhappy about the dream. Perhaps they did not realize that the dream was from God. So, they hated Joseph even more because of his dream. Verses 9 to 11. Joseph's second dream was about the sun, the moon, and 11 stars. It seemed as if Joseph's family really would bow down to him. Rachel, his mother, was probably already dead. Leah may have looked after him as his mother. The two dreams were rather similar to each other. So Joseph could expect that they would probably become true. The writer does not tell us whether God showed their meaning. Joseph's family might think that Joseph did not really have such dreams. But Jacob continued to think about the dreams. Previously, Jacob had dreams that came from God. So, Jacob was not surprised if Joseph had such dreams. Verses 12 to 13. Shechem was a long way from home. It was also the same place where the brothers had killed many people. It might have been dangerous for Joseph to go out alone. Jacob did not think that. However, Jacob was anxious about his other sons. And he trusted Joseph. Joseph would tell Jacob the truth about what was happening. Joseph was a loyal son who always obeyed his father. So Joseph went. Verse 14 to 17. In fact, the brothers were not still at Shechem. Probably there was not enough grass there for all their animals. So, they had to move to another place. Verse 18. Even before Joseph arrived, his brothers were plotting to kill him. Verse 19. The brothers were angry with Joseph because of the dreams. If Joseph's dreams had no meaning, there would be no reason for the brothers to be angry. So probably, the brothers were thinking that the dreams might be right. And they were jealous of God's plan for Joseph. So, they tried to stop God's plan. If that was their intention, they were very foolish. God is much more powerful than this. Nobody can successfully oppose God's plans. Verses 20 to 21. The brothers intended to leave Joseph without food or water. Then, he would soon die. Verse 22. Reuben was the oldest brother. So he probably considered that Joseph was in his care. If Reuben saved Joseph, perhaps Jacob would respect Reuben again. Verses 23 to 24. The brothers took away Joseph's coat. Jacob wanted to show that Joseph had the birthright. That is probably why he had given the coat to Joseph. So, the brothers were trying to take the birthright from Joseph. Verses 25 to 27. It was better for the brothers to sell Joseph. Then they would not murder their brother, and so they would not be guilty of that. Also, they would get some money. Joseph would become a slave. Verse 28. The traders included both Midianites and Ishmaelites. They were traveling together. The Midianites were friends of the Ishmaelites, who were a larger group. Verses 29 to 30. Reuben was elsewhere when the brothers sold Joseph. So, Reuben did not know that his plan to save Joseph had failed. Perhaps Reuben only realized this when he returned to rescue Joseph. Reuben tore his clothes. This action showed that he was very sad. People usually tore their clothes when a relative died. Verses 31 to 32. The brothers made a plan in order to pretend that Joseph was dead. They put blood from a goat on Joseph's special coat. They handed the coat back to Jacob. None of the brothers felt able to take the precious coat for himself. They knew that they did not deserve the birthright. Verse 33 to 34. Jacob seemed even more sad about Joseph than Jacob was about Rachel's death. Genesis 35:16-20. Verse 35. The only daughter of Jacob that the writer has told us about is Dinah. But people did not speak much about their daughters. Verse 36. In Hebrew, captain of the guard means this. It means the chief man among the killers. So it might mean the chief man among those who provided meat for Pharaoh's household. It might mean the leader of the army. Or it might mean the chief man among those that killed murderers as a punishment. Pharaoh ruled over Egypt. All the kings of Egypt were called Pharaoh. Genesis 38. Judah's family. Judah lived among the Canaanites. He married a Canaanite woman. But God wanted the Israelites to keep themselves separate from foreign people. At that time, Judah left his brothers. He went to stay with a man from the town of Adullam. His name was Hira. While he was there, Judah met the daughter of Shua, a Canaanite man. Judah married her and he had sex with her. She became pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. Judah gave him the name Er. His wife became pregnant again, and she gave birth to another son. She gave him the name Onan. Later, she gave birth to another son. She gave him the name Shelah. She gave birth to Shelah in the town called Kizib. Judah found a wife for his oldest son, Er. Her name was Tamar. But the Lord saw that Er, Judah's firstborn son, was very bad. So the Lord made him die. Then Judah said to Onan, "You should marry your dead brother's wife and have sex with her. You are her dead husband's brother. You must have a son who will become your dead brother's descendant." In the Old Testament, if a man died before his wife had children, his brother should marry the dead man's wife. If the wife then had a son, they called that son the child of the dead brother. But Onan did not want Tamar to give birth to his child. He knew that the child would not belong to him. So when he had sex with his brother's wife Tamar, he made his semen go onto the ground. Then Tamar would not give birth to a child for Onan's dead brother. What Onan did was bad, and the Lord was not pleased with him. So the Lord made Onan die too. Then Judah said to his son's widow, "Tamar, go back to your father's house and live there as a widow. Stay there until my son Shelah grows older." Judah thought, "I do not want Shelah to die in the way that his brothers died." So Tamar went to live in her father's house. Judah does not want to give Shelah to Tamar as a husband. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had stopped being sad because of her death, he left his home to travel. He went with his friend, Hira the Adullamite, to a place called Timnah. He went to see the men who were cutting the wool from his sheep. Someone told Tamar, "Your husband's father is going to Timnah to get the wool from his sheep." Wool grows like hair on the skin of sheep. People use it for making clothes. Tamar knew that Jacob's son Shelah had now grown to become a man. But Judah had not yet let him marry her. So Tamar took off her widow's clothes and she put on other clothes. She covered her head with a veil. She did not want anyone to recognize her. Then she went and she sat at the gate of Enaim town. Enaim is on the road going to Timnah. Judah saw her as she sat there. He thought that she was a prostitute, because she had covered her face. He did not know that she was his son's widow. He went to her at the side of the road. He said, "Let me have sex with you." Tamar asked him, "If I have sex with you, what will you give me?" Judah replied, "I will take a young goat from my animals and I will give it to you." Tamar said, "You must give me something now to show that you will send the goat to me." Judah asked her, "What should I give you?" Tamar replied, "Give me your special ring and the string that holds it. And give me the stick that is in your hand." So Judah gave them to her. He had sex with her. As a result, she became pregnant. The special ring and the stick would have Judah's mark on them. So other people would know who they belonged to. After this, Tamar left there and she took off her veil. She put her widow's clothes on again. Judah sent his friend Hira, the Adullamite, to take a young goat back to where the woman had been. Judah wanted to get his special things back from the woman. But Hira could not find the woman. He asked some men who lived there, "Where is the temple prostitute who sat by the road at Enaim?" But the men said, "There has not been any prostitute here." A temple prostitute sat at a place where people went to worship foreign gods. So Hira went back to Judah, with the goat. He told him, "I did not find her." The men who lived there said, "There has not been any temple prostitute here." So Judah said, "Let her keep the things that I gave to her. People will laugh at me if you go back there again. I sent this young goat for her, as I promised, but you could not find her." 3 months later, someone told Judah, "Your dead son's wife, Tamar, has become a prostitute and now she is pregnant." Judah said, "Take her out of the town and burn her to death." So they took Tamar out and they were going to kill her. But she sent a message to her dead husband's father. She said, "The man that these things belong to had sex with me. That is why I am pregnant. Look at these things carefully. Do you know who the ring, its string, and the stick belong to?" Judah saw that the things belonged to him. He said, "She is more in the right than I am. She has done this because I would not give her to my son, Shelah, as his wife." Judah did not have sex with Tamar again. The time came for Tamar to give birth, and there were twins. While she was giving birth, one baby put out his hand. The woman who was helping Tamar tied a red string to that baby's arm. She said, "This baby came out first." But then the baby took his hand back inside and his brother came out first. The woman said, "You have opened a way for yourself to come out." So they gave him the name Perez. Then his brother came out, with the red string on his arm. They gave him the name Zerah. Perez means pushing out. Reuben, Simeon, and Levi had all upset Jacob. They were his 3 oldest sons. Jacob did not want them to have the birthright. So, Jacob decided that Joseph would receive the birthright. But now, Jacob thought that Joseph was dead. So, Judah became Jacob's most important son. Judah was Jacob's 4th son, after Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. But much of Judah's life would also disappoint Jacob. Judah had 3 sons. The first son, called Er, married Tamar. But Er was so evil that God killed him. The people then had a custom that they considered important. If a widow did not yet have a child, the unmarried brother of the dead husband would marry the widow. Then, they would have children together. So, Er's brother, called Onan, married Tamar. But he too was evil, and God killed him. Judah promised that Tamar could marry Judah's last son, called Shelah. But when Shelah became old enough to marry, Judah did not arrange the marriage. So, Tamar made a plan. She covered her face so that nobody would recognize her. She pretended to be a prostitute. And she tempted Judah. Afterwards, Judah discovered that Tamar was expecting a baby. He was very angry that she had acted as a prostitute. He wanted to kill her. But she was able to show that Judah himself was responsible for her situation. Judah felt very guilty. He confessed that he had been unfair to her. And he allowed her to live. In fact, she had twins, 2 babies born together. The oldest, called Perez, received the birthright among Judah's descendants. Judah's character and attitudes changed after this event. Before it, he was responsible for the sale of Joseph as a slave, Genesis 37:26-27. Afterwards, Judah himself offered to become a slave in order to save Benjamin, Genesis 44:16-34. Among Jacob's sons, Judah was the oldest son who received Jacob's blessing, Genesis 49:8-12. And that blessing was very special. Jacob said that Judah's descendants would include the kings of the Israelites. And the special descendant of Eve, Genesis 3:15, and of Abraham, Galatians 3:16, would be a descendant of Judah too. This special descendant means Jesus, Hebrews 7:14. God sent Jesus to free people from their sins. Notes on the verses. Verses 1-5. The writer never tells us the name of Judah's wife. Jacob's sons did not marry into their own tribe as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had done. Verse 6. Tamar was probably a Canaanite. Verse 7. The writer does not tell us what Er's sin was. This was the first time that God killed one particular person only. Or anyway, Er is the first one that we can read about. In the Great Flood, God had killed nearly everyone. And in Sodom and Gomorrah, he had killed all the inhabitants except for Lot's family. Verses 8 to 10. Tamar had no children and Onan was unmarried. There was an ancient custom for people in this situation. The family expected a dead man's brother to have sex with the dead man's widow. If a child was then born, people accepted it as the dead man's child. It meant that the child would inherit instead of the brother. However, the brother was the child's actual father. It is not clear whether people expected the brother to marry the widow. Perhaps they expected him just to have sex with her. But, among the Israelites, the brother had to marry her. Sex between people who were not married was always wrong. Onan was evil because he was doing a wrong thing to Tamar. A wife or widow was ashamed if she had no children. Onan was not obeying God. God had told Onan's relatives to have large families. Also, Onan was not obeying his father. Verse 11. This promise meant that Tamar and Shelah were engaged. Verse 12. Instead of his friend Hira, some translations say his shepherd Hira. Hira may have been a shepherd, but here he was Judah's friend. The time when people cut the wool off sheep was a very important occasion. There were feasts for the men that cut off the wool. And there was much wine at the feasts. Verses 13 to 14. We do not know whether prostitutes usually wore veils. Tamar wore one so that Judah would not know her. Maybe other prostitutes wore veils so that people did not know them. Tamar covered her face because she did not want people to know her. We read here, then she sat at a crossroads. But some translations say, then she sat at the side of the road. That place was on the way into Enaim. The original Hebrew text has this. Then she sat at the opening of the eyes. Some writers a long time ago thought that it meant this. She sat where two roads came together. That seems to be a likely place for a prostitute to meet people. There, people were going from one place to another. Verses 16 to 17. Sex between very close relatives in a family was very evil. But Judah did not recognize her. He agreed a price for sex. Verse 18. A pledge was a thing that a person gave as a promise. It was a promise that the person would pay a certain price. The person had agreed about the price. When the person had paid the price, then he or she received the pledge back again. Tamar asked for some things that belonged to Judah. The seal was a small tube that someone had made out of metal or stone. It had special marks. Those marks showed that the seal belonged to Judah. The owner kept the seal on a string. The stick probably had special marks on it too. So those things could only belong to Judah. They could not belong to anyone else. Verse 20. Judah sent the kid so that he would receive his pledge back. Verse 21. Hira asked for a prostitute that meets people in the temple. Before, in verse 15, the writer used the word for an ordinary prostitute. A prostitute from the temple was more important than an ordinary prostitute. It was more polite to ask for a prostitute from the temple. But only people who served idols would use a prostitute from the temple. So, perhaps Judah served idols at this time. Verse 23. Judah was a rich man. He was afraid that his friends would laugh at him. They might laugh because a prostitute had kept his seal and stick. Actually, she had stolen them. Judah had tried to pay the prostitute with the kid. And Judah emphasized here that Hira certainly knew it. Verse 24. Tamar was engaged to Shelah. Her father had promised to give her to Shelah as a wife. So, when Tamar had sex with someone else, that was adultery. Israelites used to punish people that had done adultery. Later, the Israelites threw stones at such people until those people were dead, as a punishment. But Tamar was also guilty because she had become a prostitute. Judah felt great shame that a member of his family had become a prostitute. Verse 25. Tamar was able to prove that she had had sex with Judah. She still had his pledge. The seal and stick had special marks. They could only belong to Judah. Verse 26. Judah knew that he had done something wrong. He had been unfair to her. He had not done the things that he promised to do. He had not followed the custom to help her to have a baby. So, he confessed that he was wrong. Afterwards, he acted in the right manner. He never had sex with Tamar again. Verses 27 to 30. Tamar had twins. It was important for the family to know who was born first. That son would have the birthright, and he would become the leader of Judah's family. Genesis 39. Joseph in Egypt. Joseph's brothers had sold him to the Ishmaelites. We now read about what happened to Joseph after that. The Ishmaelites took Joseph to Egypt and they sold him there as a slave. Potiphar bought Joseph from the Ishmaelites. He was one of Pharaoh's officers. He had authority over all the guards. And the Lord was with Joseph, so that good things happened to him. Joseph lived in the house of Potiphar, his Egyptian master. Potiphar saw that the Lord was with Joseph. He saw that the Lord helped Joseph to do good work always. So Joseph pleased Potiphar. Potiphar gave Joseph authority as his special servant. Joseph took care of everything that belonged to Potiphar. From the time that Potiphar gave Joseph authority over everything in his house, the Lord blessed the people of Potiphar's house, his animals, and his crops. The Lord did that because of Joseph. So Potiphar told Joseph to take care of everything that belonged to him. Potiphar did not worry about anything in his house. The only thing that he thought about was the food that he ate. Joseph was a strong and handsome man. After some time had passed, Potiphar's wife saw that Joseph was handsome. She said, "Come to bed with me." But Joseph refused to do that. He said, "My master does not need to think about anything in the house. I take care of everything that belongs to him. No one has more authority in this house than I do. My master keeps nothing from me, except you. That is because you are his wife. I could not do such a bad thing. I could not do a sin that is against God." Potiphar's wife continued to speak to Joseph every day. But he would not agree to go to bed with her. He would not even go near her. One day Joseph went into the house to do his work. None of the other servants were there in the house. Potiphar's wife suddenly took hold of Joseph's coat. She said, "Come to bed with me." Joseph left his coat in her hand and he ran out of the house. Potiphar's wife saw that Joseph had left his coat in her hand. She saw that he had run out of the house. So she called her servants to come. She said to them, "Look here. The Hebrew man that Potiphar brought to work here does not respect us. He came in here and he tried to have sex with me. But I screamed loudly. When he heard me scream like that, he ran out of the house. But he left his coat here with me." Potiphar's wife kept the coat beside her until Joseph's master, Potiphar, came home. Then she told him this story: "The Hebrew slave that you brought to us tried to insult me. He wanted to sleep with me. But I screamed loudly for help. So he left his coat with me and he ran out of the house." Joseph's master heard the story that his wife told him. She said, "This is what your slave did to me." When Potiphar heard that, he was very angry. He took hold of Joseph, and he put him in prison. It was the place where the king put his own prisoners. While Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was still with him. He was kind to Joseph. He caused the leader of the prison guards to like Joseph. So this man gave Joseph authority over all the other prisoners. Joseph was responsible for everything that they did in the prison. The prison guard did not worry about anything that Joseph had authority over. He saw that the Lord was with Joseph. Whatever Joseph did, the Lord helped him to do it well. Joseph was just a slave when he arrived in Egypt. But soon, he began to have a successful career. Joseph worked for an important man called Potiphar. Soon, Potiphar realized that Joseph had many skills. Joseph was responsible and capable. Everything that Joseph did was successful. So, Potiphar gave Joseph authority over everything in his Potiphar's household. The promise that God gave to Abraham, Genesis 12:3, was starting to happen. God was blessing Potiphar because of Joseph. Joseph even impressed Potiphar's wife. She wanted to have sex with Joseph, who was an attractive young man. But Joseph knew that God does not permit such behavior. So, Joseph refused. Potiphar's wife was angry with Joseph. She lied that he tried to rape her. So, Joseph became a prisoner. Even in prison, Joseph impressed people. The guard realized that Joseph was responsible and capable. So, the guard gave Joseph authority over the other prisoners. Soon, Joseph was managing the prison. Joseph was still a prisoner. But even in the prison, God made Joseph successful. Notes on the verses. Verse 1. The writer now goes back to the story about Joseph. This verse reminds us about Genesis 37:36. The writer tells us that Joseph went down to Egypt. He probably means that a lot of the land in Egypt is lower than the mountains in Canaan. But Joseph had gone down in another way. He also went down in his social importance. He became a slave. He was not still a favorite son in a rich family. Verses 2-3 in this chapter, the writer often tells us that the Lord was with Joseph. Joseph suffered, but the Lord was still taking care of him. And the Lord made Joseph successful. So, Potiphar appointed him to do more important tasks. Verse 4. Joseph soon became more important. He was a useful person and people trusted him. At home with his brothers, his own family did not respect him. But here in Egypt, his master respected him. That is clear. Soon, Joseph had authority over everything. But he worked well. He did not cheat his master. Verse 5. God was blessing Potiphar because of Joseph. In other words, Potiphar became more successful because Joseph was working for him. Verse 6. Potiphar did not worry about his household. That shows how much Potiphar trusted Joseph. Verse 7. Joseph would not do wrong things. The situation was very difficult for him. His master's wife had a lot of power. Verses 8-9. Joseph was responsible to his master. But Joseph also knew that he was responsible to God. We can see that Joseph was a righteous man. He did not care about his own pleasure. Instead, Joseph thought about what God wanted him to do. Verse 10. This did not just happen once. The master's wife tried to tempt Joseph every day. Verse 11. The master's wife had probably sent the other servants out. Verses 12-13. On this day, the master's wife held Joseph's clothing firmly. So, Joseph could not just walk away, as he had done on other days. But Joseph refused to do what she wanted. He ran out of the house. She was still holding his clothing. He had done the right thing. But the master's wife now had evidence that seemed to prove her lie. Verse 14. The master's wife pretended that Joseph tried to rape her. When the wife talked to the servants, she even blamed her husband. She said that he had brought a foreign slave into the house. Verses 16-18. The master's wife repeated her lies to her husband. She wanted him to punish Joseph. She was very angry with Joseph. Perhaps she felt ashamed that she tried to tempt Joseph. But she was not sorry. Like Joseph's own brothers, she hated the fact that Joseph was righteous. Verses 19-20. The master's wife had said that Joseph had tried to rape her. The usual punishment for that was death. Potiphar put Joseph into prison. It was a special prison. If a servant of the king had to go to prison, the king's officers kept him there. We do not know why Potiphar did not kill Joseph. But Potiphar was the captain of the guards. Genesis 38:36. So, perhaps Potiphar was responsible for the prison too. Potiphar knew that Joseph was capable. Perhaps Potiphar thought that Joseph would be very useful in the prison. The writer does not use people's names very much in this story. He talks a lot about he, she, the master and the master's wife. Perhaps it showed that the people in the story belonged to different social classes. Joseph was a slave. Potiphar and his wife were the master and the master's wife. They even had the legal right to kill their slaves. Verse 21, God caused the keeper guard of the prison to like Joseph. But the guard did not prove that Joseph was not guilty. He did not take Joseph out of prison. Verse 22, soon, Joseph became very important in the prison. He had authority over all the other prisoners. Even in prison, God made Joseph successful. Verse 23, again the writer tells how people trusted Joseph. And the writer reminds us why Joseph was successful. Joseph was successful because God blessed him. Genesis 40. Joseph tells two people what their dreams mean. Sometime later, two of the king's officers made him angry. One of them was the king's cupbearer. The other was the king's baker. The cupbearer had authority in the king's house. He would make sure that the king's wine was safe for the king to drink. Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, both the cupbearer and the baker. Pharaoh put them in the same prison that Joseph was in. That was in the house of the captain of the king's guards. They were in the prison for a long time. The captain of the guards made Joseph their servant, to help them. One night, both of the king's officers had a dream. Each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were upset. So Joseph asked the two officers, "What are you sad about?" They replied, "We both had dreams last night, but there is nobody to tell us what they mean." Joseph said, "Only God can tell you the meaning of dreams. Tell your dreams to me." So the king's cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me. There were 3 branches on it. New leaves came on the branches, and then flowers came. After that, there were grapes which became ripe. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes and I pressed them. Then I put the juice into the cup and I gave the cup to Pharaoh." Joseph said, "This is what your dream means. The 3 branches tell us about 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and he will make you his officer again. You will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand, as you did before. But when these good things happen to you, remember to be kind to me. Tell Pharaoh about me so that I will get out of this prison. Men took me hold of me in the land of the Hebrews and they brought me here. Even here, I have not done anything wrong. I should not be in this prison. Lift up your head means you will be important again." The king's baker heard what Joseph had said to the cupbearer. He realized that the meaning of the cupbearer's dream was good. So he said to Joseph, "This was my dream. I had 3 baskets of bread on my head. The top basket contained many different kinds of bread for Pharaoh. But birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Joseph said, "This is what your dream means. The 3 baskets tell us about 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head. He will hang you on a tree. Then birds will eat the meat off your body." 3 days later, it was Pharaoh's birthday. He gave a feast for all his officers. He lifted up the head of the cupbearer and he lifted off the head of the baker. He brought them both out of the prison so that all his officers could see. Pharaoh caused the cupbearer to be his own cupbearer again. As a result, the cupbearer put Pharaoh's cup into his hand again, as he did before. But Pharaoh hanged the baker to kill him. So it all happened in the way that Joseph said it would happen. But the cupbearer did not think about Joseph at all. He completely forgot about him. Joseph was responsible for all the prisoners. So, Joseph was a skilled manager. But Joseph was also a holy man. And he knew that his relationship with God was very important. Even in prison, Joseph was still a righteous man. 2 prisoners had strange dreams on the same night. They thought that their dreams had an important meaning. But they did not know the meaning. So, they were worried about the dreams. Joseph told the prisoners that God knew the meaning of their dreams. Then God showed Joseph the meaning. The butler's dream meant that Pharaoh would free the butler. And Pharaoh would reappoint the butler to his old job. Joseph asked the butler to tell Pharaoh about Joseph's situation. The baker's dream meant that the baker would soon die. 3 days later, these things happened as Joseph had said. But the butler did not tell Pharaoh about Joseph. It was not yet the right time for Pharaoh to free Joseph. God had a plan for Joseph. But Joseph did not yet know about this plan. Notes on the verses. Verse 1, Pharaoh was the special name that all the kings of Egypt had. Verses 2 to 4, these men worked for the king. So, they went to the special prison for the king's prisoners. Joseph was responsible for the prisoners in that prison. Verse 5, the Egyptians believed that the gods sent dreams. They had many wise men. Those wise men said what dreams meant. The two prisoners were unhappy. Each one believed that the gods had sent a message to him. They could not discover what the dreams meant. Verses 6 to 7, Joseph really cared about the prisoners that he looked after. He even noticed that the men were anxious. He encouraged them to tell him why they were worried. Verse 8, Joseph did not believe in their false gods. But he knew that the real God knows the solution to every problem. Of course, most dreams have no special meaning. But sometimes God uses dreams to speak to people. Joseph had such dreams in the past, Genesis 37, 5-9. And he could remember these dreams, Genesis 42:9. Perhaps he was hopeful about the future because of these dreams. Verse 9 to 11, the chief butler's dream described the work that he used to do. He would make drinks for Pharaoh. And then the butler would give the drinks to Pharaoh. Verse 13, lift up your head means more than one thing. It can mean that the person does well. His head will not be down in shame any longer. He will show his face. He will not be sad. That was how the chief butler would be. Verses 14 to 15, Joseph asked the butler to tell Pharaoh about Joseph's situation in prison. Joseph did not deserve to be in prison. Soon, the butler would be free. And the butler would be important again. So, the butler would have the opportunity to speak to Pharaoh about Joseph. Verses 16 to 17, the baker's dream also seemed to describe his work. But something was wrong. The birds were taking the bread that belonged to Pharaoh. Verse 18, Joseph was honest. He told the meaning of the dream, although the meaning was bad news. He did not pretend that the dream had a good meaning. He did not say that in order to please the baker. Verse 19, lift up your head could also have another meaning. It could mean that someone would put very strong thick string round a person's neck. Then someone would hang the person. That was what happened to the chief baker. Verses 20 to 22, Pharaoh was the king of Egypt. Kings often did special things to prisoners on the king's birthday. It was a way for the king to show how important he was. Pharaoh had the power of life and death over his people. He could order someone's death. Or, he could make someone important. Pharaoh did whatever he wanted.